The night my husband introduced my sister as the new CEO of my own company, I was still wearing my badge, not metaphorically. The actual access badge with my name, Avery Collins, printed under the logo of a company. On the stage, Ethan Collins, my husband of 9 years, smiled like a man who had finally stepped into his destiny. Beside him stood my older sister, Natalie Brooks, one hand resting lightly on his arm, as if it had always belonged there. "Our board believes this leadership transition reflects the future," Ethan said into the microphone. And I couldn't be prouder to introduce Natalie Brooks as interim CEO. People clapped, glasses clinked, someone whistled. I didn't move. Before I tell you how a company valued at $650 million disappeared from under my feet, take a second. If you're drawn to stories about betrayal, power, and what happens when someone finally stops being underestimated, like this, subscribe and leave a comment. Stay with me. This didn't start on a stage. It started years earlier, in silence. I was 32 years old at the time, founder and former CEO of Youre Systems, a healthcare analytics company based in Austin, Texas. We processed predictive data for hospital networks in 12 states. Last quarter alone, we cleared $87 million in revenue. I built the algorithm myself. I hired the first engineer. I signed every major partnership. Until 3 months ago. 3 months ago was when Ethan suggested I step back. "Just temporarily," he said one night at home, swirling wine in a glass that had my company logo etched on it. "You've been under so much pressure. Let me handle operations while you focus on strategy." I trusted him. That was my first mistake. Ethan had joined Youre 2 years after we married. I made him COO because he understood people, or so I thought. I understood systems. Together, it worked. Or it looked like it did. Natalie had been there even longer. My sister was 8 years older, louder, more polished. She had never built anything herself, but she knew how to speak like she had. Investors loved her. Boards listened to her. My parents trusted her. Growing up, Natalie was the one who had presence. I was a quiet one, the one who stayed up late fixing things while she was being admired. That dynamic never changed. It just got better lighting. The first sign was small, a calendar invite I wasn't copied on, a board dinner scheduled while I was out of town. Ethan explaining decisions after they'd already been made. "Don't take it personally," he'd say. "You hired me to take things off your plate." I didn't fight it. I adjusted. That was my second mistake. By the time the emergency board meeting was called, I was already being referred to as founder emeritus. Not officially, casually, like a joke that wasn't funny if you heard it clearly. The meeting took place on December 14th, 4 days before our annual holiday gala. Natalie sat at the head of the table, flipping through printed financials she hadn't prepared. Ethan sat to her right. I was offered a seat near the wall. "Given recent volatility," said Mark Ellison, our board chair, "we need stability." Stability, a word people use when they mean control. Ethan spoke next. "Avery agrees. This is best." I looked at him. He didn't look back. That night, I slept in the guest room. 2 weeks later, I found the first piece of proof by accident. I was reviewing an archived server log when I noticed access credentials that didn't match our internal protocols. Natalie had been granted authority to initiate executive actions weeks before the board vote. Ethan's signature was on every approval. I confronted him in our kitchen, quiet, controlled. "You planned this," I said. He didn't deny it. He sighed. "You were never meant to scale this alone," he said. "Natalie understands optics. I understand execution. You're brilliant, Avery, but brilliance isn't leadership." That was when I noticed the familiarity in his voice, the tone he used when speaking to her. I checked his phone that night. That was my third mistake. I didn't need to. The messages were months old. Hotel confirmations, private jokes, planning conversations that had nothing to do with business. My sister and my husband had been building something together, just not with me. The gala was their victory lap. I stood there, badge still on, listening to Natalie talk about vision and clean breaks. She didn't mention my name once. After the applause died down, Ethan finally noticed me. He approached slowly, like someone nearing a fire they weren't sure was out. "We'll talk later," he said. This didn't have to be ugly. I smiled then. Small. Calm. "You're right," I said. "It doesn't." I walked out of the ballroom without another word. By midnight, my email access was revoked. By morning, my name was removed from the company website. By noon, my own board had issued a press release framing my exit as mutual. They thought it was over. What they didn't understand was this. Helixora wasn't taken from me in one night. It was taken because they assumed I would grieve quietly. Because they thought being calm meant being finished. They were wrong. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't threaten. I started documenting. And that was the moment everything changed. Because there was one thing Ethan and Natalie never learned about me. I don't react. I prepare. And the people who mistake silence for surrender never see what's coming until it's already too late. The morning after the gala, I woke up before dawn in a house that no longer felt like mine. Ethan was still asleep in the master bedroom. I could hear him breathing through the wall, steady, untroubled. I didn't wake him. I didn't pack dramatically. I took only what I needed: my passport, my laptop, a legal notebook I'd kept since Elixir's first seed round. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter beside his phone. I drove to my office downtown out of habit, not because I expected to get in. The badge reader flashed red. I stood there longer than necessary, watching security cameras pivot slightly, tracking me. It was a small humiliation, but it landed hard. This building had been leased in my name 7 years earlier. I had negotiated every clause myself. Now I was locked out like a stranger. A young security guard I didn't recognize stepped outside. "Ma'am," he said carefully, eyes flicking to the tablet in his hand. "I'm supposed to ask you to leave the premises." I nodded. Of course. I didn't argue. I didn't ask him to check again. I walked back to my car with the same posture I used to walk into investor meetings. Calm, controlled, observant. At 8:12 a.m., my mother called. Her name? Linda Collins. Lit up my screen. "I saw the announcement," she said without greeting. "Why didn't you tell us you were stepping down?" "I didn't step down," I replied. There was a pause. "Natalie said you agreed." "Natalie always said that." "I was removed," I said, quietly. Linda sighed. "Avery, honey, you have to admit Natalie makes more sense as the face of the company. You've always hated attention." I closed my eyes. Not because it hurt, because it clarified. "You knew," I said. "I knew they were considering options," she corrected. "Your father agrees. This is better for everyone. Everyone except me." After we hung up, I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes, watching employees badge in. Some I'd hired myself. None looked my way. The first mini hook came quietly then, not as anger, as recognition. They didn't just betray me. They coordinated. I drove straight to a co-working space on South Congress, paid for a private room, and opened my laptop. Helixor's internal access was gone, but my personal archives weren't. Years of emails, draft contracts, early cap table versions, Slack exports I'd saved instinctively. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for yet. I just knew I would need everything. At 10:37 a.m., I received an email from Rachel Nguyen, Helixor's former general counsel. She had resigned 6 weeks earlier, citing strategic misalignment. At the time, I'd assumed burnout. Her message was short. "You didn't lose control yesterday. You lost visibility months ago. Call me." We met that afternoon in a quiet coffee shop near Zilker Park. Rachel looked tired, but relieved. Like someone who had been holding their breath. "They moved faster than I expected," she said once we sat down. "But the structure is fragile." "Explain," I said. Rachel stirred her coffee, then looked at me directly. "Ethan didn't have the authority to reassign voting control the way he did. Natalie doesn't meet the independence criteria the board claims she did. And the valuation they're using to justify the transition relies on forward projections you personally authored." I didn't interrupt. "The problem," Rachel continued, "is that they assumed you wouldn't contest it, that you'd disappear quietly and preserve the brand." I smiled slightly. "They know me poorly." Rachel leaned forward. "If you act now, this becomes a corporate governance issue. If you wait, it becomes a divorce." That sentence landed. I had built Helixera to be acquisition-ready, not coup-proof. I had trusted the wrong people with the wrong levers. But trust, once broken, becomes data. I spent the next week invisible. I stayed at a small hotel near the river. I ate alone. I declined calls. I let Ethan's texts pile up unread. He sent 7 in 3 days. "We can fix this. You're overreacting. Natalie is temporary. Don't burn everything down. Think about your parents. You're making yourself look unstable." That last one almost made me laugh. On Thursday, I received the final document I needed. A whistleblower report filed internally 2 months earlier, flagged as resolved. It had been submitted by an anonymous engineer, citing manipulation of data narratives presented to the board. The resolution note was signed by Ethan. The timestamps didn't lie. That was the second mini-hook. The one that told me this wasn't just personal betrayal. It was fraud adjacent. On Friday morning, Natalie gave her first interview as CEO. She wore white, spoke about collaboration, referred to me as brilliant, but burnt out. I watched the clip once. No sound. Then I closed my laptop and made 3 phone calls. The first was to Rachel Nguyen. The second was to Thomas Reed, a litigation partner at a firm specializing in fiduciary disputes. The third was to Caleb Morris, Helixera's first angel investor, who had once told me, "If anyone ever tries to take this from you, call me first." Caleb answered on the second ring. I wondered how long it would take, he said. By Sunday night, the outline of my counter-strategy was clear. Not loud, not emotional, sequential. Ethan and Natalie thought they had won because they controlled the narrative. They didn't realize the narrative depended on assumptions. Assumptions about my silence, about my priorities, about my capacity for patience. They believed removing me from the building removed me from the game. What they didn't know yet was this. The company they stole was still standing on foundations I designed, and I knew exactly where the cracks were. The next chapter wouldn't be about exposure. It would be about leverage. And leverage, when applied slowly, doesn't look like revenge at all. It looks like inevitability. The first move I made didn't involve a courtroom. It involved a spreadsheet. I rented a small office for a week under my personal LLC, the one I'd formed years earlier to hold my intellectual property before Helixera existed. I spread documents across the desk like a crime scene. Cap tables from 3 funding rounds, early safe notes, board resolutions with language so careful it almost hid its intent. I wasn't looking for betrayal. I was looking for shortcuts. They were everywhere. The deeper I went, the clearer it became that Ethan and Natalie hadn't stolen Helixera in one clean motion. They'd leaned it, quietly, gradually. They'd shifted voting power through temporary proxies, relied on emergency clauses meant for pandemics and hospital collapses, not founder sidelining. They'd used my credibility to justify decisions I hadn't approved. That pattern was my opening. On Tuesday morning, Rachel Nguyen came by with a banker's box and a look that told me she'd slept even less than I had. "This is everything legal didn't want surfaced," she said, setting the box down. Email threads, drafts that never made it to final. Notes from meetings where Natalie wasn't supposed to be present. "Was she?" I asked. Rachel nodded. Every time. Inside the box was the second whistleblower report. Not the one Ethan had marked resolved. Another. Filed, withdrawn, then refiled under a different category. The author wasn't anonymous this time. It was Daniel Ortiz, Helixera's head of data integrity. I had recruited him from Johns Hopkins myself. He was methodical, risk-averse, not dramatic. I called him. He answered on the 4th ring, voice tight. "I was wondering when you'd find me." We met that night in a parking garage near his apartment. He didn't want cameras. He didn't want coffee. "They told me you were stepping away," Daniel said, leaning against his car. "Then they told me not to contact you." "What changed?" I asked. "They started editing outcome narratives," he said. "Not the data, the interpretation. Just enough to make projections look smoother. Just enough to justify leverage." "Who approved it?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "Ethan Collins," Natalie Brooks reviewed. I took a breath. Slow. "Did you document it?" I asked. Daniel opened his trunk and handed me a flash drive. Twice. That was the third mini-hook. the one that made everything else align. The following morning, Ethan filed for divorce. Not because he wanted to end the marriage, because he wanted jurisdiction. He filed in Travis County, citing irreconcilable differences and concerns about business interference. His attorney, Michael Landry, requested a temporary restraining order, preventing me from contacting Helixora employees or investors. It was clean, strategic, almost impressive. I didn't panic. I called Thomas Reed. "They're trying to isolate you," Thomas said after reviewing the filing. "They want to frame this as personal, not corporate, so we keep it corporate," I replied. He smiled. "Exactly." By Wednesday afternoon, Natalie convened an all-hands meeting. I wasn't invited, but 3 people sent me recordings anyway. In the video, she spoke calmly about alignment and a unified vision. She didn't mention my name, but she didn't need to. By Thursday, the rumors had started. I was unstable, emotional, jealous, bitter over the affair. People whispered that I'd lost perspective. Perspective was the one thing I hadn't lost. At noon, Caleb Morris called me. "They're pushing for a debt restructure," he said. "Private, fast." "That would require my algorithm as collateral," I said. "Correct," Caleb replied. "Which you still technically own." I smiled for the first time in days. Helixora's core predictive engine wasn't fully transferred. I'd delayed the assignment during a tax optimization review. At the time, it had seemed cautious. Now, it was decisive. At 2 p.m., Thomas Reed filed a motion contesting the restraining order. At 2:17 p.m., Rachel Wynn submitted a formal notice of concern to the board, citing governance violations. At 2:42 p.m., Daniel Ortiz sent an encrypted packet to an independent compliance firm in Boston, flagged for regulatory review. I didn't announce anything. I didn't threaten. I let systems do what systems do when pressure is applied in the right places. That night, Ethan called me for the first time since the gala. His voice was tight, controlled. "Why are people asking questions?" he said. "I don't know," I replied truthfully. "Maybe they're curious." "You're trying to destroy this company," he snapped. "No," I said. "I'm trying to understand it." There was a long pause. "This could get ugly," he warned. "It already is," I replied. "You just didn't notice because you weren't the one being erased." He hung up. On Friday morning, Natalie's name appeared on a regulatory inquiry notice. Not public, not yet, but enough to freeze the debt restructure. Enough to make the board nervous. Enough to make Ethan miscalculate. At 11:06 a.m., he sent an email to the board without legal review. Defensive, rambling, emotional. Rachel forwarded it to me with one line. He blinked. That was the 4th mini-hook. The one that told me momentum had shifted. I spent the weekend alone, walking the trail along the river, replaying conversations from years earlier. The times I'd deferred. The times I'd let Natalie speak for me. The nights I'd chosen peace over precision. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. On Sunday evening, I drafted a single document. Not a lawsuit, not a statement, a timeline. It began with the founding of Helixora. It ended with the unauthorized transfer of authority. Every date sourced, every signature cited, every assumption dismantled. I didn't send it, not yet, because the next step wasn't exposure. It was confrontation. And I wanted them all in the same room when it happened. The board had scheduled a closed session for the following Wednesday. Natalie would chair it. Ethan would attend. They believed I'd been neutralized by legal maneuvering and social pressure. They believed I was cornered. What they didn't understand was this. Corners are only traps if you stop moving. And I was just getting started. The board meeting was scheduled for Wednesday at 9 a.m. in the Helixora Executive Suite. I wasn't on the invite. That didn't matter. By Monday morning, 3 different board members had already called me privately. Not to apologize, not to confess, to feel out the ground beneath their feet. The first was Elaine Porter, an independent director who had joined during our Series C. She spoke carefully, like someone testing ice. "Avery," she said, "there's concern about instability. We want to understand your intentions." "My intention," I replied, "is to make sure no one here is asked to defend something they didn't authorize." There was a pause. Then, "That's helpful." The second call came from James Holloway, a venture partner who had never quite hidden his skepticism of Natalie. "Did they really cut you off from the algorithm IP?" he asked. "No," I said. "They assumed they had." That was all he needed. By Tuesday night, the mood had shifted from confidence to caution. Natalie sensed it. She sent a company-wide memo emphasizing unity, discouraging speculation, and reminding employees that all external communications required approval. Control language tightened too fast. I slept well. Wednesday morning, I arrived at the building at 8:40 a.m. I didn't badge in. I didn't need to. Rachel Wynne met me in the lobby, calm, carrying nothing but a slim folder. She nodded once. "Conference room A," she said. "They changed rooms last night." Of course they did. Outside the boardroom, I could hear voices. Natalie's, bright and confident. Ethan's, lower, impatient. Rachel opened the door. Every head turned. Natalie froze mid-sentence. "Avery," she said, smiling too late. "You're not scheduled for this session." "I know," I replied. "I'm not here as an executive." Elaine Porter cleared her throat. "We were just beginning." "I'll be brief," I said, stepping into the room. "Then I'll leave." Ethan stood. "This is inappropriate." "No," I said evenly. "This is corrective." Silence settled. The kind that doesn't argue. I placed a single printed document on the table. The timeline. "I won't speak to motivations," I continued. "Only actions." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look at Natalie when I began. On August 3rd, authority was granted to Natalie Brooks to initiate executive decisions under an emergency proxy clause intended for public health disruptions. There was no qualifying event. James Holloway leaned forward. "On September 14th, I continued, Ethan Collins approved changes to data interpretation narratives without notifying the board's risk committee." Elaine's pen stopped moving. On October 2nd, internal whistleblower reports were marked resolved without independent review. Ethan's jaw tightened. And on November 28th, I said, finally looking at Natalie. Forward-looking projections were presented, using assumptions that contradict the underlying dataset. Natalie laughed lightly. "This is absurd. You're emotional." Rachel spoke for the first time. "She's accurate." That landed. I didn't wait for permission. "The core predictive algorithm remains under my personal LLC due to an unexecuted transfer. Any attempt to collateralize or restructure debt using that asset is unauthorized." That changed the air. Elaine looked at Ethan. "Is that true?" Ethan hesitated. Just a fraction too long. "We were in the process of." "Process is not permission," James said sharply. Natalie finally lost her composure. "This is a coup." I shook my head. "No, this is a correction." I gathered my papers. "I'm not asking for reinstatement," I said. "I'm asking for a pause." Elaine nodded slowly. "Granted." Ethan stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. I walked out without another word. By noon, Helixora's planned debt restructure was officially suspended. By 3 p.m., the board had retained an external governance firm. By evening, Natalie's interim authority was under review. Ethan came to the hotel that night. He knocked once. Hard. I opened the door halfway. "You blindsided me," he said. "You did that first," I replied. "You're risking everything we built." I met his eyes. "We didn't build this together. You joined late." That hurt him. I could see it. "You'll never get it back," he said. "They don't want you." I smiled then. Small. Certain. "I don't need them to want me," I said. "I need them to need the truth." He left without another word. At midnight, Natalie sent me a message. "You think this makes you powerful." I didn't reply. Because power wasn't what I was reclaiming. I was reclaiming authorship. And the story wasn't finished. Not even close. The board's pause didn't feel like victory. It felt like the moment right before something heavy tips. By Thursday morning, Helixora was suspended in a strange half-state. Natalie still had the title, but no authority. Ethan still had access, but no confidence. The board still met, but nothing moved without outside eyes watching every decision. That kind of pressure makes people reveal themselves. At 7:18 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. "This is Victor Hanley," the voice said. "I'm with Northbridge Capital. We need to speak." Northbridge wasn't just an investor. They were Helixora's largest institutional backer, 22% equity. Quiet, patient, dangerous when annoyed. We met 2 hours later, in a private conference room at a downtown hotel. Victor arrived with a junior associate, and no small talk. "You were removed without a founder separation agreement," he said. "That concerns us." "They assumed I'd accept a narrative instead," I replied. Victor nodded. "Natalie Brooks requested approval for an executive compensation adjustment last night. Did you grant it?" I asked. "No," he said. "We requested documentation." That was the mini-hook I needed. "They can't produce it," I said, "because it doesn't exist." Victor studied me. "You're calm." "I'm precise," I replied. By noon, Northbridge had joined the board's request for a full internal audit. Not the kind handled quietly. The kind that pauses bonuses, freezes stock options, and requires sworn attestations. At 1:34 p.m., Ethan texted me, "You're enjoying this." I didn't respond. At 2:10 p.m., my divorce attorney forwarded me a draft motion filed by Michael Landry on Ethan's behalf. He was asking for emergency relief, claiming I was attempting to sabotage marital assets out of spite. The word spite made me smile. Because spite is loud. Spite is careless. What I was doing was methodical. At 4 p.m., Natalie called. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was clipped, controlled, and angry beneath the surface. "You've made your point. This needs to stop. You're hurting people who didn't do anything to you." She still didn't include herself in that sentence. That night, I met with Thomas Reed and Rachel Wynn in a private office Rachel had access to through a former client. No Helix Aura branding, no glass walls, just a table, 3 chairs, and truth. "We're entering the dangerous phase," Thomas said. "They're going to try to force a settlement." "On what terms?" I asked. "Money," he said. Silence. "Reputation," Rachel shook her head. "They want you to disappear with dignity so they can survive." I leaned back. "That's not happening." "What do you want, Avery?" Thomas asked. I didn't answer immediately. "I want control returned to lawful governance," I said finally. "And I want the affair documented." Rachel looked at me carefully. "That will escalate this into public territory." "I know," I said. "I'm done protecting their image." The next day was the holiday gala's aftermath luncheon, a closed event for senior partners and board affiliates. Natalie insisted on hosting it anyway. Image maintenance. I wasn't invited. I attended, not as a guest, as a speaker. Victor Hanley introduced me without warning. "This company exists because of Avery Collins," he said into the microphone. "And given recent questions, we believe transparency is appropriate." Natalie went pale. I stepped up calmly. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I'm here to clarify." The room went silent. "There has been an undisclosed personal relationship between 2 executives that compromised governance and decision-making," I continued. "This relationship coincided with unauthorized shifts in authority and data presentation." Someone gasped. Natalie stood. "This is inappropriate." I met her eyes. So was lying to the board. Ethan didn't move. "I'm not asking for sympathy," I said. "Only accuracy." I stepped back. Victor resumed the mic. "The board will be addressing these matters formally." The luncheon ended early. Outside, reporters had already gathered. I didn't stop. I didn't speak. That was Natalie's mistake to make. By evening, the story had shifted. Not scandal. Breach of trust. At 9:02 p.m., my mother called again. This time, her voice shook. "Natalie says you're trying to ruin her life." "I'm telling the truth," I replied. "She's your sister," Linda said. "And I was your daughter," I answered. Silence. Before I end this chapter, pause with me for a moment. If you've ever been told to stay quiet to keep the peace, even when that peace cost you everything, you understand this moment. If this story resonates, like it, subscribe, and tell me in the comments if you believe silence protects anyone but the people in power. Because from here on, nothing could be contained. The audit was no longer internal. The divorce was no longer procedural. And the company they took from me was about to decide who it actually belonged to. They thought Chapter 5 would be where I slowed down. It was where I stopped shielding them. And that changed everything. The morning after the luncheon, Helix Aura's stock didn't move. That unsettled everyone more than a crash would have. Markets hate surprises, but they hate uncertainty more. Investors were waiting, watching, measuring which version of the story would harden into fact. By 9 a.m., the board had issued a formal notice, initiating a full independent investigation under Section 11.4 of the Governance Charter. External counsel, external auditors, no executive interference. Natalie's name was still on the letterhead. That wouldn't last. I spent the morning in a conference room at Thomas Reed's firm, reviewing filings related to Ethan's emergency divorce motion. The language had shifted overnight. Less accusation, more concern. He was losing leverage, and he knew it. "They're going to try to settle fast," Thomas said, sliding a document toward me. "Cash, equity, non-disparagement. And control?" I asked. Thomas shook his head. "They'll never offer that voluntarily." "Then we don't settle," I said. At noon, I received an encrypted message from Daniel Ortiz. "They're scrubbing logs." Slowly, but clumsily. I forwarded it to Rachel Nguyen and didn't respond. Scrubbing logs doesn't erase timestamps. It creates them. That afternoon, Natalie called an emergency executive meeting. I wasn't present, but 3 separate summaries reached me within the hour. She'd framed the audit as routine. She'd described my statements as emotionally motivated. Then she made her second major mistake. She promised stability. Stability requires credibility. She had already spent hers. At 4:17 p.m., Northbridge Capital issued a formal request for Natalie's temporary removal pending the outcome of the investigation. 2 other investors followed within minutes. By evening, the board had no choice. Natalie Brooks was placed on administrative leave. The press release was careful, neutral, bloodless. But inside Helixora, it landed like a dropped plate. Ethan came to the hotel again that night. This time, he didn't knock. He waited in the lobby. I found him sitting rigidly on a leather chair, jacket still on, phone face down in his hands. "They suspended her," he said as soon as he saw me. "Yes," I replied. "She's my wife's sister," he said, as if saying it out loud might change something. "She was your affair partner," I said calmly. He flinched. "You don't have to keep doing this," he said. "We can mediate, quietly. You get your money, your dignity." "I already have my dignity," I replied. "You mistook my patience for permission." He leaned forward. "They'll never let you run it again." "I don't need to," I said. "I just need it returned to lawful hands." "Which aren't yours," he said. I met his eyes. "We'll see." That night, I slept without interruption for the first time in weeks. The next phase didn't arrive with headlines. It arrived with emails. On Monday morning, the external audit firm issued its first preliminary finding. It wasn't public, but it was circulated to the board and primary investors. Material misrepresentation of data interpretation, failure to disclose conflicts of interest, improper use of emergency governance provisions. Ethan's name appeared repeatedly. Natalie's appeared more. At 10:22 a.m., my phone rang. This time, it was Elaine Porter, her voice stripped of diplomacy. "They didn't tell us everything," she said. "No," I replied. "They told you what they thought you'd accept." "What do you want?" she asked. "I want the founder protections enforced," I said. "And I want interim leadership appointed without familial ties." There was a pause. Then, "We should have done this months ago." "Yes," I said. "You should have." By Wednesday, Ethan's emergency divorce motion was denied. The judge, Marissa Cole, cited insufficient evidence of sabotage and noted that corporate disputes were not grounds for restraining personal conduct. Ethan lost jurisdictional control. That afternoon, his attorney requested a private meeting. I declined. Letting them wait was no longer strategy. It was boundary. The company moved faster after that. The board appointed a temporary independent CEO, Dr. Leonard Hayes, a retired healthcare executive with no connection to Natalie or Ethan. He requested a meeting with me on his first day. "I don't want your job," he said. "I want your map." I gave it to him. Not the algorithm, the context. Where Helixora bent, where it broke, where it endured. He listened without interrupting. "You built this to outlast you," he said when I finished. "Yes," I replied. "I just didn't expect to be tested so soon." Dr. Hayes nodded. "That's usually how it works." On Friday evening, my mother came to see me. She looked older than she had a month ago. Smaller, like someone whose certainty had finally exhausted itself. "I didn't know," Linda said as soon as she sat down. "I know," I replied. "She says you humiliated her," my mother continued. "I told the truth," I said. "She says you planned this," Linda said. I met her gaze. "I plan to protect what I built." My mother's shoulder slumped. I always thought Natalie was stronger. She's louder, I said. That's not the same thing. Linda nodded slowly, like the thought was new and unwelcome. Before she left, she hesitated. What happens now? She asked. I considered the question. Now, I said, the system finishes what it started. Because systems don't care about affairs or alliances. They care about process. And the process was finally doing its work. By the end of Chapter 6, Helixora was no longer theirs to maneuver. It was under scrutiny, under control, and one step closer to being returned to the only hands that had ever built it without agenda. Mine. They just didn't know yet how inevitable that had become. The day Ethan lost access to Helixora's internal systems, he finally understood what panic felt like. It showed up in his voice. He called me at 6:06 a.m., earlier than he ever used to wake up when we were married. I didn't answer. I let it ring. I wanted him to sit with it for a moment, with the absence. By the time I listened to the voicemail, he was no longer pretending to be calm. They locked me out, he said. This is temporary, right? Avery, you need to tell them this is a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It was the first, clean consequence. By mid-morning, the independent investigation had escalated from review to formal findings. External counsel had completed preliminary interviews with 6 senior employees. 4 of them contradicted Ethan's written statements. 2 of them submitted emails they had been told to delete. Natalie wasn't answering calls. That was new. I met Dr. Leonard Hayes that afternoon at a quiet office near the medical district. No branding, no press. Just a whiteboard, a pot of coffee, and a man who had nothing left to prove. They're unraveling faster than I expected, he said, scanning a summary document, which tells me the structure was never stable. It was borrowed stability, I replied, built on my credibility. He nodded. I've seen this before. Founders are useful until they're inconvenient. And then? I asked. And then the company remembers who actually understands it. He slid a document across the table. A request, not a reinstatement. Not yet. A formal advisory mandate giving me authority to interface directly with regulators, auditors, and the board on matters of origin IP, data governance, and founder intent. In other words, they needed my voice again. I signed without hesitation, not because I wanted power back, because they couldn't move forward without acknowledging the truth. That evening, the story broke nationally. Not gossip, not scandal, governance breach, undisclosed conflicts, executive overreach. Natalie Brooks was mentioned by name. So was Ethan Collins. I watched the segment once. No sound, just faces and captions. Then I turned it off. My mother called an hour later. This time, she didn't accuse. She didn't defend. She cried. I don't recognize her, Linda said. I don't recognize him. And I don't know how I didn't see this happening. You saw what you wanted to see, I replied, not unkindly, just accurately. She says you set her up, my mother whispered. I set boundaries, I said. She crossed them. Silence. I'm tired, Linda said finally. So am I replied. After we hung up, I sat alone in the hotel room and felt something unfamiliar. Not sadness, relief. Because the burden of being the only one who knew the truth was finally lifting. The next day, Natalie resurfaced. She didn't call me. She called the press. Her statement was brief, defensive, and revealing. I trusted the wrong people, she said, and I'm being punished for ambition. Ambition. She had always loved that word. The board didn't respond. They didn't need to. At 3:48 p.m., the audit firm issued its second finding: intentional suppression of internal risk flags, unauthorized executive compensation discussions, personal relationships materially affecting corporate decision-making. The phrase materially affecting appeared 3 times. Ethan's name appeared 5. By Friday, the board had convened an emergency vote. I wasn't present. I didn't need to be. The outcome reached me by text from Elaine Porter. Ethan Collins has been removed, effective immediately. Cause cited. I read it once, then I closed my phone. That night, Ethan showed up one last time. Not at the hotel, at my parents' house. I wasn't there, but Linda told me everything the next morning. He had been angry, then pleading, then quiet. He told her, I had destroyed him. Linda told him to leave. That was the moment I knew something fundamental had shifted. Not because he fell, but because no one rushed to catch him. On Sunday morning, I walked along the river again. The same path I'd walked weeks earlier, when everything still felt suspended. This time, the air felt different. The company was no longer in limbo. The narrative was no longer contested. And the people who had built their power on my silence were finally facing what happened when that silence ended. The next phase wouldn't be about exposure or correction. It would be about return. Not to a title, not to a marriage, but to authorship. Because when the system finishes stripping away what was taken without consent, what remains is always the same: the truth. And the truth was already walking back toward me, one decision at a time. The return didn't come with an announcement. It came with a document. I received it at 7:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, forwarded by Elaine Porter, with no commentary attached. Just a PDF and a single line in the body of the email. We need your decision by Friday. The document was titled Founder Reinstatement and Restitution Framework. They still couldn't bring themselves to call it what it was: an admission. I didn't open it right away. I made coffee. I stood by the window and watched the city wake up. I let the moment stretch until it lost its sharpness. Urgency had been used against me too often. I wasn't borrowing it now. When I finally read, the structure was careful. Temporary reinstatement as CEO pending final audit closure. Immediate restoration of voting rights. Transfer of operational authority from interim leadership upon acceptance. A clause acknowledging improper removal without cause. And then the number: $650 million. The most recent independent valuation of Helixora Systems. The company Ethan and Natalie had tried to reposition as something they had inherited. They hadn't just taken my role. They had tried to rewrite ownership. That was the hook that mattered. I met with Thomas Reed and Rachel Wynn that afternoon in Thomas's office. The blinds were half closed, light slanting across the table, like a deliberate choice. They're offering reinstatement, Thomas said, but they're also trying to cap liability. Rachel flipped through the document. They want you back in the chair, but not in the story. I nodded. We changed that. We worked line by line. Founder authority, not subject to spousal claims. Public acknowledgement of governance failure. Full separation of personal relationships from executive eligibility. Restoration of my original compensation and equity position retroactive to removal. And one clause I added myself. Independent forensic review of all executive actions taken during my absence. Findings to be disclosed to shareholders. Thomas raised an eyebrow. That's going to hurt. Yes, I said, but it will also end this. By Thursday morning, Ethan's attorney requested a call. I declined. Natalie's attorney sent a letter alleging defamation and personal harm. Thomas replied with receipts. The following day, the board convened without me. I didn't need to be there to know how it went. The calls started before the meeting ended. Elaine Porter first. They accepted most of it. James Holloway next. Some resistance, but Northbridge pushed. Victor Hanley last. You'll have your vote back by Monday. By Sunday evening, Helixora issued a press release. Not dramatic, not apologetic. Helixora Systems announces leadership realignment and governance reforms. My name appeared in the second paragraph. Founder and Chief Executive Officer Avery Collins will resume leadership effective immediately. No mention of Natalie. Ethan's name was nowhere. That night, my phone buzzed with a message I hadn't expected. Natalie, you didn't have to destroy everything. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back one sentence. I didn't destroy anything. I stopped pretending it was intact. She didn't reply. Monday morning, I walked back into the building with a temporary badge. Temporary, because they were reissuing credentials. Permanent, because no one asked me to leave. People stood when I entered the executive floor. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough to notice. I didn't smile. I nodded. In the conference room, Dr. Leonard Hayes stood and extended a hand. "Welcome back," he said. "Thank you for holding the line," I replied. "I didn't," he said. I held the door. The first meeting was operational. Dry. Necessary. We reviewed system integrity, vendor confidence, employee retention metrics. No one mentioned the affair. No one mentioned the fallout. But it was there, in the pauses, in the way people waited for me to speak. Halfway through, I stopped the meeting. "There's something we need to address," I said. The room went still. "This company does not reward proximity to power," I continued. "It rewards accountability. If anyone here believes relationships entitle them to authority, this is not the place for them." No one moved. "Good," I said. "Let's continue." By afternoon, the internal message went out. Clear, firm, founder-led. No euphemisms. By evening, Ethan's remaining access was revoked, permanently. At 8:19 p.m., he sent one final email. "I never thought you'd choose this over us." I didn't reply, because that sentence finally told the truth he'd avoided for years. He had never seen me as us. He had seen me as something to step through. I spent the night alone in the office, sitting in the chair I hadn't occupied in months. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. The return wasn't about reclaiming a title. It was about re-establishing authorship. And authorship changes everything. The next chapter wouldn't be about rebuilding systems or restoring trust. It would be about consequences. Because when power is taken and then returned, it doesn't come back quietly. It comes back with memory. And memory doesn't forget who tried to erase it. The consequences didn't arrive as punishment. They arrived as audits. On my first full day back, I signed 3 authorizations before noon. Forensic accounting, data integrity review, governance remediation. Each one carried a quiet message. This wasn't about optics anymore. This was about record. By mid-afternoon, the building felt different. Not tense, focused. People spoke carefully, not because they were afraid of me, but because they were listening again. Systems respond to clarity. So do people. At 3:12 p.m., the forensic team flagged the first irregular transfer. Not massive, not dramatic, but deliberate. A consulting invoice, approved during my absence, routed through a Shell LLC with a familiar address. Natalie's address. I didn't react. I asked for a timeline. At 4:05 p.m., the second flag appeared. Executive expense reimbursements tied to personal travel. The dates matched hotel confirmations I already knew by heart. Ethan's signature sat at the bottom of each approval. I asked for preservation notices to be issued. Immediately. By the time I left the office that night, 3 phones were already ringing in the legal department. The next morning, I met with Judge Eleanor Wright, the court-appointed mediator overseeing the corporate side of the divorce proceedings. She was precise, unsentimental, and unimpressed by drama. "Ms. Collins," she said, scanning the brief, "you're not asking for damages." "No," I replied. "I'm asking for separation." "From your husband," she clarified. "From interference," I said. She nodded once. "That's cleaner." Ethan's attorney tried to argue that my reinstatement was retaliatory. Judge Wright didn't let him finish. "Cause was established," she said flatly, "and documentation predates the affair's disclosure. Sit down." Ethan didn't look at me. Not once. Outside the courtroom, he finally spoke. "You're enjoying humiliating us," he said. I shook my head. "You're confusing visibility with humiliation. You could have kept this private." "You made it structural," I replied. "Structures get examined." Natalie's hearing followed 2 days later. She arrived in a tailored suit, hair perfect, posture rigid. The room held its breath when she spoke, as if confidence might still bend reality. "I was targeted," she said, "because I challenged a founder who couldn't let go." Judge Wright leaned back. "You challenged governance," she replied, "and governance challenged you back." The forensic findings were entered into record. Not all of them, just enough. Undisclosed compensation discussions, conflict of interest violations, misuse of emergency provisions. Natalie's composure cracked when the LLC was mentioned. "That was personal," she said. "That was corporate," Judge Wright replied. By Friday, the board voted unanimously to revoke Natalie's eligibility for any executive role within Helixera or its subsidiaries. Indefinite. Documented. The press release was brief. Natalie Brooks steps down following governance review. No adjectives. No redemption arc. That night, my mother called. She didn't cry this time. "I don't know how to talk to her," Linda said. "You don't have to," I replied. She says you wanted this. I wanted accuracy, I said. What she did with that is her choice. Linda was quiet for a long time. I keep thinking about when you were little, she said. You never fought for attention. You just waited. I wasn't waiting, I said. I was learning. On Sunday, Youre held a town hall. I stood at the front of the room. No podium, no script. I'm not here to rewrite the past, I said. I'm here to end the confusion. I spoke about boundaries, about process, about what happens when loyalty is confused with silence. I don't expect trust overnight, I said. I expect questions. Ask them. They did. Afterward, an engineer approached me quietly. Thank you, he said, for not making this emotional. I nodded. It already was. I just didn't add to it. That evening, I sat alone in my office and looked out over the city. Lights blinking, movement continuing. The world didn't stop for betrayal. It recalibrated. If you've ever wondered whether telling the truth is worth the cost, this is the part no one tells you about. The cost comes either way. The difference is who pays it. If this chapter resonates, like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments whether you believe consequences should be quiet or public. Because the next step wasn't about punishment. It was about closure. And closure doesn't come from winning. It comes from choosing what you won't carry anymore. Closure didn't arrive with an apology. It arrived with a calendar. On Monday morning, my assistant slid a printed schedule onto my desk. Not meetings, deadlines, regulatory filings, contract renewals. Quiet work that moves companies forward after the noise fades. That was when I knew the crisis phase was over. People had stopped reacting. They were rebuilding. The forensic audit continued without drama. Every week, a new report landed in my inbox. Not explosive, just precise. The kind of detail that doesn't trend, but changes outcomes. I didn't read them alone. I read them with Dr. Leonard Hayes, our interim CEO, and Marisol Vega, the new head of internal controls I'd hired from a pharmaceutical giant in New Jersey. Marisol didn't flinch at conflict. She didn't soften language. She did something far more effective. She documented. This isn't about bad actors, she said during one review. It's about bad incentives. That sentence stayed with me. At home, the divorce moved forward without theatrics. Ethan's posture shifted noticeably once the court rejected his last attempt to reframe the case as mutual miscommunication. There was nothing mutual about it. We met once in a mediation room downtown. Neutral walls, neutral chairs, neutral tone. He looked thinner, older, not defeated, just exposed. I never thought you'd come back like this, he said, staring at the table. Like what? I asked. In control, he replied. I considered that. I was always in control, I said. You just mistook my trust for absence. He didn't argue. The settlement was clean. No shared assets tied to Youre, no gag orders, no joint statements, just separation. Natalie didn't attend. According to my mother, she had moved out of state, somewhere quieter, somewhere she could tell the story without interruptions. I didn't ask where. At Youre, the cultural reset took shape slowly. We dismantled informal power structures that had grown comfortable in my absence. Titles were clarified, decision rights mapped, emergency clauses rewritten with explicit thresholds. No more shortcuts. One afternoon, Elaine Porter stopped by my office. You could have taken more, she said. Damages, public accountability. I took what mattered, I replied. She nodded. You always did know where to stop. That night, I walked through the building alone after everyone had left. Lights dimmed, screens dark. The hum of servers steady and familiar. This place still felt like mine, not because my name was on the door, because the values were back in the walls. At home, my relationship with my mother shifted again. Not dramatically, just honestly. She stopped asking me to explain myself. She started listening. I keep replaying things, Linda said one evening over the phone. Moments where I chose ease over fairness. You did what you knew how to do then, I replied. You don't have to keep doing it now. She exhaled slowly. I'm trying. That was enough. One Friday afternoon, a junior analyst knocked on my door. I wanted to thank you, she said, nervous, for saying what you said at the town hall. What part? I asked. The part about not confusing loyalty with silence. She hesitated. I've been quiet my whole career. I thought that was professionalism. It can be, I said, until it costs you your voice. She nodded, eyes bright, and left. That moment mattered more to me than any press correction. By the end of the month, Helixora's valuation stabilized. Vendors returned. Investors stopped hovering. The company moved forward without needing to constantly reference the past. That's how you know healing is real. It stops being the topic. One evening, I sat on my balcony and thought about the woman I'd been when this started. The version of me who assumed fairness would protect itself, who believed proximity to truth was enough. It wasn't. Truth needs structure, and structure needs someone willing to enforce it without apology. I didn't feel hardened. I felt clearer. The final step wasn't revenge. It wasn't forgiveness. It was release. I no longer needed Ethan to understand. I no longer needed Natalie to admit anything. I no longer needed my parents to choose sides. I had chosen myself. And that choice, once made, didn't require reinforcement. It held. The story was nearly finished. Not because everyone had learned their lesson, but because I had. And the last chapter wouldn't be about what they lost. It would be about what I kept. What I kept wasn't the company. That surprised people. Helixora was stable again. Profitable. Clean. My name was back on the filings, my authority unquestioned. From the outside, it looked like a full restoration. But what I kept ran deeper than a title. I kept my clarity. That became obvious the first time the board asked me a question I used to answer automatically. Do you want to pursue an acquisition this quarter? Elaine Porter asked during a strategy session. 6 months earlier, I would have said yes. Growth had always been the reflex. Expansion as proof of worth. This time, I paused. No, I said. We're not ready. The room went quiet. Financially, we are, James Holloway said carefully. I know, I replied. Culturally, we're not. No one argued. That was new. Power used to feel like momentum. Now, it felt like restraint. Outside of work, my life rearranged itself in quieter ways. I moved out of the hotel and into a smaller place across the river. Less space, fewer memories. No shared walls with the past. I didn't take much with me. Some clothes, books I'd actually read, the first notebook where I'd sketched Helixora's original architecture in pen because I couldn't afford design software yet. I left the rest behind, without ceremony. Ethan tried once more to reach me. Not through lawyers, not through family, through nostalgia. He sent an email late one night with the subject line, "Remember this?" Inside was a photo from our early years. A cramped apartment, 2 laptops on the floor, empty takeout containers. Me smiling without knowing what was coming. I stared at it longer than I expected. Then I deleted it. Not because it didn't matter, because it didn't belong to him anymore. Natalie never reached out again. According to my mother, she had taken a consulting role in another state. Smaller firm. No leadership title. No public profile. She says she's starting over, Linda told me. Good, I replied. And I meant it. Starting over is honest work. As long as you don't bring the old patterns with you. My relationship with my parents settled into something real for the first time. Not warm, not distant, just grounded. We stopped pretending everything had been fair. We stopped pretending I'd been difficult. One afternoon, my father said something that would have shattered me a year earlier. I didn't know how to stand up to Natalie, he admitted. It was easier to believe you didn't need us. I nodded. I didn't, but I wanted you. That truth didn't fix the past. It adjusted the future. At Helixora, the last piece of the audit closed without fanfare. No fines, no ongoing oversight. Just a clean report and a recommendation letter noting effective founder-led remediation. I printed it and put it in a drawer. I didn't need it framed. The most unexpected shift came from within. I stopped replaying conversations, stopped rewriting endings, stopped imagining what I should have said. The noise in my head quieted the moment I accepted that not everyone who betrays you thinks they're doing something wrong. Some people simply choose themselves without considering the cost to others. I had finally done the same, but with accountability. One evening, after a long day, I walked through the office one last time before heading home. The lights were dimmed. The building settled. The systems ran without supervision. That was the point. I passed the conference room where Ethan had once told me I was brilliant, but not a leader. I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. That's how I knew I was done carrying it. I locked my office door, stepped outside, and breathed in the night air. For the first time since this all began, my life didn't feel like a response. It felt like direction. The final chapter wouldn't be about what I survived. It would be about what I chose next, and why choosing yourself once changes everything that comes after. The choice didn't announce itself. It showed up as an empty morning. No emergency calls, no board escalations, no lawyers waiting for a signature. Just sunlight through the window and a calendar that didn't demand anything from me for the first time in years. That was when I understood what freedom actually felt like. Not relief, not triumph, space. I went into the office anyway. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to walk through it one more time without urgency attached. People nodded as I passed. Some smiled. No one flinched. No one whispered. That mattered. At 10 o'clock, I called a meeting with the senior leadership team. No agenda sent in advance. No tension in the room. I'm not leaving, I said before anyone could speculate. But I am changing how I lead. They listened. For a long time, this company ran on my vigilance. That ends now. Systems don't need heroes. They need standards. I laid out the final structure. Clear succession planning, distributed authority, a governance framework that didn't depend on my constant presence to function. Dr. Leonard Hayes nodded once. That's how you make something last. Yes, I said. And that's how you make it honest. When the meeting ended, I felt something close behind me loosen. Not because I was letting go of control, but because I finally trusted what I'd built to stand without me gripping it. That afternoon, I signed the last divorce document. No ceremony, no commentary, just a signature and a quiet acknowledgement from the clerk that everything was complete. Ethan wasn't there. That felt right. I walked out of the courthouse alone and didn't look back. There was nothing there that needed witnessing. That evening, my parents came over for dinner. Simple food. No guests. No pretending it was a celebration. At one point, my mother looked at me across the table and said, "You're different." "I know," I replied. "Not harder," she said. "Clearer." I smiled. That's the point. We talked about ordinary things after that. Weather, a neighbor's new dog, a book my father had started reading and hadn't finished yet. Normal conversation. Unremarkable. It felt earned. Later that night, I sat on my balcony and thought about the company, the marriage, the sister I no longer spoke to. I didn't feel bitterness. I didn't feel pity. I felt finished. Revenge had never been the goal, even if that's what it looked like from the outside. I hadn't set out to punish anyone. I set out to stop being erased. The truth did the rest. Helix Aura would continue without drama. My life would continue without performance. And the people who once believed they could step over me would carry the weight of that miscalculation far longer than I ever would. That was the quiet justice in it. I didn't need to rebuild my reputation. It had survived without me defending it. I didn't need apologies. Accountability had already spoken. I didn't need to win. I had chosen myself. If you're still listening, I want to leave you with this. When someone betrays you and takes what you built, the most dangerous thing you can do isn't to react loudly. It's to become precise, to document, to wait, to act without needing their validation. Revenge doesn't have to be cruel to be complete. Sometimes it's just you standing back up, reclaiming authorship, and refusing to disappear again. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like it, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you've ever had to choose yourself after being betrayed by the people closest to you, leave a comment. I read every one. This wasn't a story about a marriage ending, or a sister's betrayal, or a company worth $650 million. It was a story about dignity. And once you choose it, nothing and no one gets to take it from you again.